Was he doing something more than everyone thinks he was? The trafficking, the trying to like assemble the ability to leverage blackmail on really powerful people.
I think it's much deeper than blackmail. The first thing that I noticed was those images of inside of the temple. So he had the astrology painting on the ceiling, and then he had the Boaz and Yakin pillars, which I don't think most people caught originally. On top of that, he had the Temple of the Rock, the dome, the golden dome up top. And I was like, okay. And so he's collected at this point a petroglyph, a death bell, a piece of the Kishwa. He has a temple that has religious symbolism, that it's a ladder towards heaven. So those are two direct connections to the ideas of Crowley. You're connecting that back to his Zora Ranch home. There's some connection to Hubbard, Parsons. I think there was a real possibility that he was trying to kind of perform some sort of ritual like that.
I really think you have uncovered something interesting, man. And clearly you've really captured something in the zeitgeist with this latest Epstein video you put out, dude. Like,
Thank you.
I remember seeing it come across Instagram, actually, like one of your shorts, essentially talking about Epstein's involvement in, we'll say, occult doings. And I was like, oh man, that's a great hook. And then I like watched a little more and I was like, okay, this dude has actually kind of like gone down this rabbit hole significantly and seems to have found something, like seems to have found some kind of like real evidence and real pattern that is like occurring kind of over and over again in different ways. So this is gonna be a wild one, man. It's gonna be super speculative, obviously, but it's like it's a fun and in some ways terrifying conversation. But yeah, man.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was I knew that there was something there, but it surprised me. So it took me like 60 days to figure all of it out. It was a lot of kind of going through the details, but I knew that there was something pretty early, and then going into it, I was like, oh, this dude is like sophisticated. Like he's actually, it's not like a Barnes and Noble LARP kind of thing. It was like this dude was studying this stuff. He mixed it in interesting ways that I was like, okay, there's like a real hook to this.
Yeah, and I mean, we should preempt this by saying like neither one of us, because I mean, I'm speaking for you here, but you told me this, that neither one of us are really Epstein experts. Like we haven't gone through the whole debaucherous, malevolent, horrific detail of everything he's ever done. But I'm actually, I kind of feel like other people are more suited to do that who are interested in that. But I think what you've done is you've extracted a sort of underexplored nugget that's way more interesting to me, which is, was he doing something more than everyone thinks he was? Was he doing more than, all of the terrible, like the trafficking, the like trying to like assemble the ability to, leverage blackmail on really powerful people? Of course, that seems like the answer is yes. But you argue that he was definitely doing something more than that.
Yeah, the blackmail piece, that was a big piece of the documentary, was the blackmail is implicit just by the nature of the crimes, that everybody kind of understands that if you're doing something illegal, it can be used as blackmail. But it's more interesting to me. These people kept coming back. There was like a real interest in friendliness with him, and they wanted something, and I think it's much deeper than blackmail. And it's not to say that like everybody who went there was like involved in these deeper themes, but I think there is an element of, I think it's much more of a trust mechanism that it's kind of like initiating into a gang or something. It's like you're going to commit a crime and we have something on each other. That's how I see it. And obviously there's an element of blackmail there because you can take the other person down, but it doesn't read to me. I think the government work was obviously some blackmail, but I think it was a lot of money laundering, and the deeper elements interest me more just in terms of like how these people at that level of influence and money operate. Because I don't think it's straightforward. Regular people, working people, don't see the world like that, and that kind of stuck out to me.
Totally, man. And we should be realistic about, the psychology and the complexity of these relationships that don't necessarily indicate that anything like occult was going on, right? Like you see it in like abusive marriage relationships, right? Like you see it in
Hmm.
complicated friendships, or and then even just keeping in mind this is a very powerful, very connected, very wealthy person who can open the door to things for you in ways that are completely life changing. So even if they are doing things or abusing you directly, you still might be incentivized through all of that hardship to keep like crawling back to this just
Yes.
like
Yeah.
malicious piece of shit person. And so there is that part of it. But so with that, all these like caveats out of the way, to be like have a modicum of responsibility. Let's get irresponsible and speculative now. Um, so what was your first inkling then that he was up to something? What was like the first really core piece of evidence? Was it sort of like his obsession with accumulating these sacred objects?
No, that came much later actually. The first thing that I noticed was when James O'Keefe put out all of those images of inside of the temple. So he had
Mm,
the astrology painting on the ceiling, and then he had the Boaz and Yakin
yes.
pillars, which I don't think most people caught originally. And then on top of that, he had the painting of it, the white and blue stripes, which is obviously kind of Israel coded in a way. And then he had the Temple of the Rock, the dome, the golden dome up top. And I was like,
Hmm.
okay. As soon as I saw that, I was like, this dude is very interested in symbolism, and he has interesting ideas underneath the surface. And my immediate thought was somebody's going to make a great video about that, but it's probably going to take a long time to decode. And then nobody did it. And then the next story that came out, and this was kind of covered in our area of the internet, where people were covering the petroglyph collection, that
Mm.
there was this article that came out in the Santa Fe New Mexican that he was trying to steal ancient Pueblo petroglyphs from near his home. And for those who don't know of petroglyphs, they're like stones where they have carvings or paintings on them. And that's what makes them sacred. It's similar to like Stonehenge, but instead of a megalith, it's a petroglyph, and it has the drawing that makes it sacred. And his home was pretty closely located near one of like the hubs for Pueblo petroglyphs. And he was going out there and supposedly cutting these things out of the ground and moving them to his ranch. The other piece that I did not include in the documentary, just I felt like it was journalistically irresponsible to kind of throw this in there because it's not fully fleshed out yet. But the part of the Santa Fe New Mexican, I think it was a separate article, but part of it was that one of the girls that was abused by him alleged that they had some sort of fetish orgy sex thing out in the desert near the hills where these petroglyphs are found, and two women ended up dead and they buried them in the desert. And I
Whoa.
was like, that's weird, and
Yeah.
nobody had really talked about that. And the conclusion that everybody came to was like, Epstein was weird, he had weird interests, so he collected these things. And I was like, given the temple, I was like, there's no way he was just like
Hmm.
collecting this stuff. And so then I started kind of going down the rabbit hole of like, what's significant about this property? What's significant? And then the first thing actually from like the like occult angle was the ancient wisdom idea, the theosophy idea of like these ancient indigenous religions hold some sort of secret
Hmm.
to access these things. I was like, okay, if he's even loosely familiar with that idea, I was like, you're kind of in it. And so I started kind of going through the connections to the land, and then I worked backwards through mostly his island property. There's a couple of odd things at his Manhattan address that I didn't include because it was shakier, but
Hmm.
that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's already a significant amount of smoke. And I think to your point, and man, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen these images of the inside of the temple that show all of this stuff other than like whatever's in your documentary. So I have to dig these out. But yeah, to your point, man, that shows a lot of intentionality and knowledge on his part to include these things that are basically in like core to the Western esoteric tradition. Like
Hmm.
um I don't think they necessarily indicate any sort of malevolence, straight away because these are things like they go back to the, arguably like the two pillars, like they go back to at least the Temple of Solomon. They might go back to like ancient Egypt. They go back to all of these like, you know, it's like a core part of temple craft, like trying to build a sacred space is
Hmm.
like things like these columns, things like reflecting the higher in a lower form through like depictions of the zodiac and the sky and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But it does show that he is trying to actually use like the real rules of building a temple, building something that connects the higher and lower in clearly in his case in some kind of like twisted, um, probably evil way that man, I would these are the kinds of reasons it would be so great if he hadn't so conspicuously left this earth in such a strange way, because these are the kinds of questions now like behind bars, like, dude, could you imagine interviewing him and being like, what's up with the temple, dude? What
Yeah.
why did you include the pillars? What, like, why were you actually trying to use real rules of like sort of Western esoteric temple craft? And what was the function of this? But like these are the kinds of questions we probably will never have the answers to. But to your point, it does show intentionality. And there, I mean, while we're on the topic of the temple, there's more kind of stuff along these lines too, right?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. So I guess I'll start at the ranch, and this is more speculative, but I think it's useful. The other piece of the ranch that is interesting is that it's pretty close. It's about 80 miles away from the Trementina base.
Hmm.
The Trementina base is this strange house built into the side of a mountain that is owned by the Church of Scientology, and they have encoded all of L. Ron Hubbard's writings into titanium plates or stainless steel plates, and they put them in a titanium box, but they're buried there, and they're supposed to be like the repository for all of his stuff to last for 1,000 years. And I was like, okay, so that's an immediate connection to Babylon Working, Parsons. And I know people kind of get, they say like L. Ron Hubbard was not particularly interested. He was kind of a con man there for other reasons. But
Yeah.
but ultimately he was there. And ultimately I think he actually says something about maybe why Epstein was interested in him. Firstly, Hubbard kind of took a different path later. I think what he learned from Crowley was to not go the hidden, esoteric
Yeah.
secret society route and go the more traditional route.
Just start your own cult. Start your own.
Start your
Yeah.
own, and,
Yeah.
and also like there's financial benefits to,
Yes.
to the model that he chose. And so then I was like, okay, he's at least loosely familiar with theosophy, I think, at this point. And I think there's a real connection to Crowley here. So I kind of go through his island at that point. And the first thing that I did was I started kind of researching the blue and white stripes, which I did not know that the Israeli flag is based off of the talit, which is the prayer shawl that you see Jews at. You typically see it at the Wailing Wall, where they have sometimes it's black and white, but it's often blue and white. And that was the symbolism, according to the Talmud, is that it functions as a ladder towards heaven. So the blue is the ladder, and then the white is representative of God, of heaven, the divine in some capacity. And it's supposed to be that you climb up this ladder towards heaven. And I was like, okay, this guy, that's about as clear of a symbol that it's an odd thing, odd colors to paint a building. It's odd to put the stripes. And I was like, okay, he's doing that purposefully. And then him mixing it with the Dome of the Rock, I was like, okay, so he's interested in, there's a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah.
Islam, Templars, in the Foundation Stone, just more generally. And so I was like, okay, that's pretty clear. And then this is something that I'd read online, and I think there is evidence of this somewhere in the files. But one of the things that made this difficult is that I think he purposely misspells things in all of his emails. Everybody just assumed that he was kind of dumb.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And everybody's like, wow, this guy has horrible grammar and he misspells words all the time. And I think he does that strategically. That makes it harder to go through his stuff.
Yeah, that
I've
makes
read
sense.
online that there was some evidence of his So he submits his building plans for this temple to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and he originally proposes this octagon structure that's basically just a music pavilion. It's kind of your run of the mill, rich guy spending money on useless things kind of building. But what he builds is this cube, and he paints it these odd colors, and he puts this golden dome up top. And inside, he then paints the astrology stuff on the ceiling, and he puts in the pillars of Yakin and Boaz. But the most kind of telling part of what he did was, and this was not reported at all, I imagine because people couldn't make heads or tails of it, was you see the big door at his temple, and everybody just, it looks real, and it looks like a real door. And this was kind of I was like, okay, I'm 100% convinced at this point when I find this. The door to his temple, the huge rounded door, is completely fake. It is a painted door. It's a flat illusion of a door painted on the side of this temple. And strangely, one of the things that he does is he paints a lock on this door. And the lock is painted on the outside of the door. So it's like a sliding lock, like a, medieval castle or something, but he paints it so the lock is locked on the outside, meaning that it's locked in a way that would lock things inside. And then, and I forgot to mention earlier, the thing that I think is in the email somewhere, but I can't find, is that it looks like his architectural twin, or his architectural inspiration for this temple that deviated from the original building plan, was a bathhouse called the Hammam Yelbuga. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but it was like I think it was like the 1460s. It's a Mamluk era bathhouse that was built, and the Mamluks were famous for getting child slaves and training them as soldiers, and they also had a practice of castration of child slaves,
Fun stuff.
which I imagine is probably the inspiration for the Game of Thrones stuff. But
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and so it's a public bathhouse, so anybody could use it, but it would have been used to wash these child slaves before they were sent off to war. And I was like, okay, this dude is stacking images. The thing that really put me on the Crowley path, there was a couple of things. I should take a step back. So on his ranch, there's also a report that a chapel bell called the Las Trampas death bell was found at his New Mexico property. This death bell is it was a missionary church from like the 1700s, and this bell would only be rung during Catholic funeral masses. And it goes missing in the 1930s during a renovation, and it's never been found anywhere. And supposedly, the report is that it was found at his ranch, that it somehow just magically turns up here. So at that point, I knew he was collecting odd religious objects. He has his death bell, he has petroglyphs, and he is building this strange temple. Something I did not mention in the documentary because it was, again, poorly sourced, in my opinion. I think it's probably accurate. He called out a piano tuner at some point after the temple was built to tune this piano, and they interviewed this guy, what was in this, and supposedly had a painting of the Pope inside of this temple as well. Whoa. And he didn't remember which Pope it was, but he was like, it was odd to him that there was a painting of a Pope inside of this place.
Yeah.
And then I found that he had also somehow received a piece of the Kishwa.
Yeah.
And so for those who aren't familiar, the Kishwa is the cloth that covers the Kaaba in Mecca. So the Kaaba is the most sacred site in Islam. It's supposedly the first house of worship. It's built by Adam. It gets destroyed in the flood of Noah, and it's rebuilt by Abraham. And it's where they have the black stone. So if you see, there's always the videos of the guys circling it, and they're all trying to touch this black stone. And the black stone was supposedly given to Adam by the angel Gabriel, and it was originally white. Now it's black because it's absorbed so much sin. But they have the Kishwa, which is the cloth, this black and gold cloth that covers the Kaaba in Mecca, and they replace it every year. But as you would imagine, it's like highly sacred, and it's very
Right.
hard to get a hold of this cloth. Somehow, Epstein convinced this, Middle Eastern businesswoman to get this for him. She illegally sends it to the United States, and she marks it as like an art piece instead of some sort of relic, which apparently has different, shipping specifications. So they send it in as an art piece, and it gets sent to his house. And so he's collected at this point a petroglyph, a death bell, a piece of the Kishwa. He has a temple that has religious symbolism,
Yeah.
that it's a ladder towards heaven. He has the dome with the rock up top, and then he has this fake door. And I pretty quickly, I was like, I bet money. I didn't know. I knew loosely, but I hadn't done all of the research at that point about temple construction. And I was like, I bet money because it's an odd direction to face this fake door. And I was like,
Yeah.
I bet you this door is faced in a particular direction. So I figured out what direction that he had placed this fake door, and it was north. And
Hello, my friend. Let us intermission briefly. Did you know that I have been diligently grinding out patron/member only content every week or close to it? The library is girthing well into the dozens at this point. Check that out in the member section. And like I said, much, much more. Or over on patreon.com/third eye drops. And if you do join in over there, you will also get access to a patron only Discord server, occasional live hangs, and more. Please do tickle that algorithm, like, sub, comment, etc. if you have not already. Unfortunately, I've noticed as of late, sometimes the algorithm just does not push this content nearly as hard as it does other times. So you will miss out if you are not subbed. Much love, and back to it.
I didn't know. I knew loosely, but I hadn't done all of the research at that point about temple construction. And I was like, I bet money because it's an odd direction to face this fake door. And I was like,
Yeah.
I bet you this door is faced in a particular direction. So I figured out what direction that he had placed this fake door, and it was north. And there was a few different options there, right? So he has the
And
the
not to derail you, sorry, but just to,
no, go
just to
ahead.
sort of unpack this, like the symbolism of directionality. Like it's not the same across cultures or systems necessarily. But one thing I found that is very interesting is basically everybody inferred, just from the, I guess you could just argue that it's logic, but like one thing we can say about most mystical traditions, right, is they believed that there was innate meaning in the world, right? Like that you could
Mhm.
sort of decode God or divinity's, deeper truths just by watching nature or decoding things about, like, this goes back as far as you can go, into shamanism and stuff like that. So what you'll still find today is whether you're looking at like Western esoteric stuff, Eastern esoteric stuff, whatever, there's this understanding that you face east usually when you're meditating or praying, because east is the direction of life. That's where the sun rises from. So
Mhm.
therefore, symbolically, it has to do with like renewal, with divinity, with God, whatever. West is usually considered the direction of just the opposite, right? Like that's where the sun goes. That's death. That's the afterlife. That's the underworld. Whatever. Um, North and South, I'm more foggy on. But yeah. So North comes into play here, but North in and of itself might be the most complex and interesting direction. But tell me your take on what you think this north facing door means. Yeah, because that is what you found, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the door is faced north. So there's like a few different things that you can kind of grab from this. First is it is interesting to me because it is there's an element of like serendipity that all of these different traditions kind of land in similar areas where you have the John D
Yeah.
Watchtower directional system, and then you also have like the Abramelin, the
Yeah.
mage system. And so it is interesting that it seems almost self-evident to a lot of these different people that are not in contact with each other that this is important.
Hmm.
There's a couple things. So the Abramelin system that gets pulled, or I guess not really pulled as much as influenced into the Golden Dawn, he has demonic stuff on all four directions.
Hmm.
That gets, they expand it in the Golden Dawn, and they add angels and nymphs and all these other kind of different things attached to the directions. But there was a few things there that were interesting to me. So Boaz, the pillar, he has Boaz and Yakin, but Boaz the pillar is associated with the north. It's explicitly in the Bible, it's referenced as north. And I think it's telling that he was interested in these particular Christian symbols. He has the death bell, he has the painting of the Pope. Mm-hmm. And Boaz is associated with the side of severity on the tree of life.
Yeah.
So it was telling to me, and so he has this fake door and there's a lock on the outside. He's locking things in. In the Christian tradition, it's, not official policy, but it was a folk tradition, like a lot of kind of weird stuff that comes out of the Middle Ages. That north is the direction of the fall of man. It's the direction of evil. It's cold. It's, because originally Satan, if you go back in art, Satan is blue. He's not red.
Oh, really?
It's because he was separated from God. There was a coldness. Fire is associated with God. You have to burn the sin off of you before you can approach the throne.
Yeah. And even in more ancient esoteric systems too, fire has to do, like pneuma is often like it's funny because Stoicism has become this very kind of like pop culture self-help kind of thing in most people's minds. Mm-hmm. But if you go back into like ancient Greece, Stoic metaphysics had to do with this idea of the logos as a divine fire that was like pneumatic. Yeah. So basically they believed the primary substance of reality was this divine fire pneuma that was connected through logos. And we were all sort of like nodes in this giant tapestry of logos, basically. And that, it was essentially, and it's funny because, dude, think about now, like, people like Ryan Holiday or like people like these pop culture stoicists, they talk about things like love of fate, right? Like that's sort of like one of the big Stoic refrains. But the reason they believed that was this incredibly esoteric, it has this incredibly esoteric underpinning, which is that the logos is infinite goodness and it has created the best possible tapestry it could create. So no matter like what you think you want, you might as well love your fate because you don't understand what this grander tapestry is doing. So you may as well, like the only choice you have is how to respond to the fate that has already been orchestrated by this divine fire logos mind. So you might as well love it. That's like where the idea actually comes from. So there are like these fatalists who believed in this divine pneumatic fire. But yeah, it's not just them, man. Like the idea of fire being the sort of like, primary element closest to the divine is again like a super ancient idea. It goes at least back to Plato's Timaeus, probably further than that. So yeah, but anyway, yeah, that does make sense that the opposite correspondence would sort of indicate, being far away from this divine flame kind of concept.
Something I always say on my channel, and it bothers people, is that everything is symbols in religion. Like the root of all ideas is symbols in religion, and that bothers like modern people and materialists because we're like so disconnected from this idea. And I'm like, no, man, like the world was built by symbols in religion. That's like everything.
100%.
That to these people, like spirits walked among them. There's actually something in the woods. Don't go in there. They had real attachment to these ideas, and we've separated ourselves from that because of productivity and the way we understand time and all these kind of different ideas. But I think that's what struck me about the Epstein stuff in general is like, okay, he is like religious in some capacity, and not in a positive way, I would say, but like he was sophisticated in the way that he was studying these ideas. And it pointed to me that, going back to the North idea, I think there's a few different ways that you can skin that, but I think for me it made the most sense, given his crimes, that he was interested in a dark path. He was interested in there's an element of like all of these ideas. There's a really dark strain to it, and he was interested in this
Hmm.
northward facing, the cold path, the evil path, the demonic path, and that's how I kind of connected those pieces. But um, I'm hopeful that people will give people kind of a new way to look at all of these ideas, because I think it's probably everywhere.
Yeah.
I've had a few interesting comments. I haven't had time to confirm them, but there was people telling me that he had statues of Pan
Mm.
all over his Manhattan apartment. There's all kinds of apparently crystal balls, which has a John D element to it. I think he was pretty deep down the path. Oh, and I should finally mention that the thing that really, so I figured out the northward facing direction. I was like,
Oh,
all
yeah.
right, this dude is in it. But I went through his Amazon purchases,
Oh, wow.
and he had lots of interesting books, but particularly he had this. I want to get it right. I want to attribute the books correctly. Let's see the
Yeah.
to me. So in 2007, he purchased two books. The first book is The Secrets of Western Tantra by Christopher Hyatt, and then the second book was Modern Sex Magic by Donald Michael Craig. Um, Christopher Hyatt was a ninth degree OTO member, and so this book kind of teaches the the
The,
Crowley
yeah.
idea of how to put something in the subconscious mind and then effectuate it into the real world, and using his kind of systems.
Yeah.
Modern sex magic is interesting because he traces it all the way back. He goes back to the Temple of Solomon all the way through different traditions. But one of the promises that you can even just like look on Amazon and look at his kind of forward is that it will teach you how to create your own sex magic principles. And these are just like two of the books. So these
Hmm.
books to me tied directly to Crowley's, directly to a lot of these ideas, this kind of law of contagion, this kind of talisman idea of
Yeah.
I'm collecting all. Oh, and one of the things that I forgot to mention about the Kishwa is that the woman who sold it to him made a point to tell him that this cloth had been touched by 10 million Muslims in active prayer. And that was important to to Epstein. Epstein also made the choice when he's telling his staff to go out and get these petroglyphs. He's like, make sure to get the ones with the really big images. I want those images. So
Hmm.
he's making a specification to get the most holy or the most important, the most touched. And I think that there's all kinds of Christian relics that you can get, but I think his choice to do a to confiscate a death bell or steal this death bell is important because he's looking for grief, 170 years worth of grief that have kind of been stored energetically in this bell. But beyond those two books, so those are two direct connections to the ideas of Crowley.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me that Hyatt was a ninth degree initiate, which is, the same as Parsons. And you're connecting that back to his Zora Ranch home. There's some connection to Hubbard. I think there was a real possibility that he was trying to kind of perform some sort of ritual like that. But even beyond those two books, there are tons of books
Yeah.
on uh, yoga, New Age thinking, the Talmud, Christianity, Islam. He's like, a lot of what he's reading is either like Lolita, like sick stuff, or it's like religious, esoteric stuff.
Mm.
And something I didn't include in the documentary that I also found interesting is he spent a tremendous amount of time looking into consciousness, so much so that he
Yes.
would have like consciousness quasi conferences, these secret conferences at his properties, specifically at this temple. Um,
Oh, they would
he
have it
was.
in the temple, like on the island?
It seems so.
Whoa.
That's my impression from the emails. So, yeah, I have no confirmation on that, but that's the way it reads to me.
Wow, that I've never heard before.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack here because we're introducing a lot of things, and I'm guessing people are sort of like spottily familiar with things we've mentioned. But we could unpack more about the pillars. One thing that really occurred to me is, are you familiar with the loosh idea from Robert Monroe?
No,
Oh,
no. I
dude.
know Robert Monroe, but not.
So in his I think it's his second book actually is the first time he uses the word loosh. But the first time he proposes this idea is in his first book, Journeys Out of the Body. And it reminds me a lot of what you're talking about with this law of contagion, which is essentially that there are forces that somehow psychically feed off of this almost exhaust of the human race, like this emotional, psychical exhaust of the human race. And grief and strong emotions are kind of like the best fuel source or something. And this first comes to him in this crazy vision he has of like essentially like these higher beings that seem sort of part alien, part, you know, s- maybe immaterial, astral, spiritual beings or whatever that he says, you know, like I have no doubt this is what our ancestors would have conceived of as gods essentially. And it like destroyed his idea of what he thought like this like cartoonish idea of God or whatever. And it, like the way he ends this chapter in Journeys Out of the Body is like it's like so dark. It's basically just like, and in that moment I knew that it was all a lie and that essentially these beings are like feeding on us and Earth is kind of like this factory for this like psychical exhaust that these beings come by and they, you know, serve as some kind of fuel source for them or sustenance for them or something.
Really?
And
That's like really scary.
it's very scary. It's this very Gnostic idea, right? That this is some sort of like not just prison planet, but it's some kind of, you know, thing that we don't even understand what it is. It's some kind of weird farm or something where, you know, it's just producing this fuel source, and that's really what our purpose is or something like that. And by the way, he eventually steps away from this idea and he arrives at much more positive sort of a much more positive outlook of what's going on and settles more into this kind of familiar new age trope of we're here to learn, we're here to evolve, we choose to be here to some degree. Like we may get kind of we may be kind of misguided in our choice to come incarnate here, but it ultimately is for our like soul's highest good and we are evolving back toward like oneness, God, whatever. So eventually he does go in that direction. But what you're saying with all of these sacred objects kind of reminds me of this loosh idea, right? Like that these objects are kind of absorbing this energy to some degree. And if you accumulate a lot of these objects, or you know how to sort of um, recognize these objects as valuable in that way, it might have a number of different uses, right? Like maybe there's some kind of power in that you can use or transmute or evoke, or maybe it attracts these entities, right? Or maybe it attracts these things as like sort of nodes of this energy that they're looking for. So I don't know. That's one possibility.
That's really so he was astral projecting and he met these entities.
Yeah, so he would get into these states where I think so. I know it's chapter 20 of Journeys Out of the Body because I made a video on this chapter because I remember the first time I read it struck me hard because it's that book is sort of constructed of his early journal entries of, you know, everything from the very first time you went out of body to you know, all these way more far-flung kind of astral journeys that he went on. But this chapter was sort of written in a different, more narrative tone. And it started as like this feeling like this beam of light was communicating with him. Um, and then yeah, eventually it culminates in this vision of these like higher beings that again he says he has no doubt ancient people would have conceived of as God or gods, and then seeing like what their true, you know, aim was or what their true purpose was and how it just like devastated him and, you know, ripped this um exoteric notion of God out of his mind and was like, okay, this is really what's going on. And it ends on such a somber tone. Like it doesn't end on a good tone. So yeah, it's part of that whole ecology of early experiences he had that sort of informed his understanding of reality.
You know what that reminds me of? Totally unrelated to anything we're talking about, but that reminds me of Lazar's
Mm.
description of the aliens. Where what did he say? They wanted to take our souls and put them in jars or something
Oh
horrifying.
yeah, dude.
Yeah,
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 yeah. Like he called us containers.
yeah.
Yeah,
Containers.
yeah.
Yeah.
My buddy Chris Ramsey has brought this up a number of times, and um, Yeah, I can see how that would be. You could take a really, at face value, that sounds really kind of similar and scary uh, scary and similar in a very in a way that gels a lot with what we're talking about, which is, are we really just incubation for this, whatever this is, that it would later be consumed by some sort of demiurgic force, or like, and again, evil demiurge, not sort of original platonic demiurge, but that we are some kind of farm factory for this vital energy or something like that, and all of our suffering is to that point. um yeah, dude, it's scary stuff. It's not necessarily stuff that I subscribe to, I want to be clear, but it is, a lot of people do, and it's definitely a contagious idea, because this, I don't know, man, internet Gnosticism is just such a prevalent thing. It's this trope that like never seems to go away. Maybe it's
Hmm.
just, I don't know, maybe it's this kind of lore that just makes reality and the innate darkness of the world make more sense, right? Like, if we are on this kind of prison planet, or whatever you want to call it, it easily explains a lot. It easily explains everything from these figures like Epstein to war and suffering in mass, and what appears to be pointless suffering. So maybe it's as simple as that. That it's like this psychological catharsis, sense making mechanism or something.
Man, I think there is true evil. Like I obviously I think there's like,
Yeah.
ultimate good to it, and I would say God, in, kind of the Christian sense, but there I I that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I mean, like there is like, I don't know. I feel like you can feel the kind of evil in the world sometimes, and it's like the idea of somebody like Epstein, and I certainly don't think he's alone. It's like it feels otherworldly to
Yeah.
me, in a very real way. I mean, it's like, man, it's like really dark stuff that he
Right.
was into, and I think he's probably one of thousands across the world. And I detail some kind of cases at the end of the documentary, but there's even like the Mark Dutroux case, which I cover a little bit. There's the
Yeah.
Finders cult. I mean, there's
Yeah.
like some really dark people that seem to be evil for reasons that don't even make sense from like a human
Right.
selfishness angle.
Yes. Yeah, that I think is indisputable, man. Like, whether they're truly doing something that works, or they're deeply misguided and it becomes this gross power game that any normal person can't even come close to explaining, there's
Hmm.
clearly something there. And there's clearly all this evidence that Epstein was deeply connected into this realm, and it included so many powerful people from all over the world, in all different, sectors of the economy. And why all of those people would be caught up in this is really hard to explain. And again, it all of this is so foggy, because whether we're talking about the interest in esotericism and the occult, or we're talking about these people he's connected to, it's always impossible to like know how deeply to read into stuff, right? Like, did he
Hmm.
just have this
Yeah.
weird romance around um, symbolism and esoteric things, and being a kind of like a weird edge lordy, like libertine guy who didn't
Yeah.
respect social mores and all of this stuff? Or was it like willful participation in actual magical rituals and trying to evoke dark forces? And it seems like there actually is enough evidence on the latter point to take the idea seriously. And one of the things we probably should zoom in more on is this idea of, we've brought up Jack Parsons, we brought up Crowley, and we've made at least a tenuous connection to Epstein through them, right? And there
Hmm.
there is this, one of the core fascinations with them, with Parsons in particular, is the idea of this Babylon working. And I think
Hmm.
there's a weird possibility that Epstein may have been trying to do the same thing in an incredibly twisted way. Because if you look at the sort of broad strokes of what is trying to be communicated or done through this idea, it's not like an innately evil idea where the way it starts. Like, I'm not an expert in this, but I've tried to go down this rabbit hole a little bit in preparation for this conversation. But originally there was this novel Crowley wrote, this Moonchild novel. Are
Hmm.
you familiar with this?
Only as it relates to them trying to create the Moonchild, but not the
Right.
novel itself.
So the Moonchild is part of this Babylon working, which is you would literally give birth to this feminine vessel basically for this like goddess energy to come through. And in this Moonchild novel, he's talking about how dark forces or light forces and dark forces would basically fight for control of this vessel. And either it
Hmm.
could be this corrupt thing that comes into the world and gets totally devoured by dark forces, or it could be this like vessel of light that is like the basically like the goddess of the new eon
Yeah, yeah.
because
I
he
knew that that
believed.
was their ultimate kind of
Yeah,
goal.
because he believed, and you bring this up in your video as well, he believed that we were on the precipice of this new eon, basically, and we needed this whole new religious system, and it needed to be feminine instead of masculine, and it would be the core thing that needed to occur is this, just as through all of these religious traditions, these virgin miraculous births occur, that this would happen again, but this time in a feminine form, and that's what this Moonchild would be. It would be this vessel for this divine feminine, basically. And have you ever seen there was this like I don't remember exactly what it says, but I know the broad strokes of it. But there is actually this letter, these letters going back and forth between Parsons and Crowley, and
Is that
so
where he's complaining about L. Ron Hubbard?
Y- well, I think that's part of it, but
Yeah.
also Crowley is like annoyed with what Parsons is doing, and he thinks he's misguided, and he's not doing
Hmm.
what he originally set out to do.
Hmm.
So there, it's kind of like there's this like fall, like the apple falling further and further from the tree, where I think Crowley, very complicated character who often gets dismissed as this, you know, basically having no redeeming qualities, right? This like this satanic, evil, debaucherous person, and clearly there is some of that stuff in his history. Very easy to argue, but I mean, he's also very learned, very complicated. Sometimes he writes the most beautiful imaginable stuff. Sometimes it's the most like lowbrow, insane, dark shit. Um,
Hmm.
and I know there are people like who write biographies of him and take a more nuanced take on him. So I don't want to dismiss him as that. But I think by the time you get to a Parsons, and then even more so by the time you get to an Epstein, I think whatever this initial kind of vision was, it just keeps getting more and more twisted into something more like more off base and off kilter. And so again, to just kind of re-summarize it, you have this idea that you somehow through these ritualistic workings are going to help induce this miraculous birth of this moon child that is going to hold this feminine divine energy and bring about this new age. So that's what Jack Parsons is doing, who's also this very famous rocket scientist who's, working at JPL and like sincerely considered to be the father of modern rocket science. And then there's all of these offshoots of this story. Like, did he bring other things into the world? Some people believe he manifested the sort of UFO
Yeah. Yeah.
flap,
That's an
right?
interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so now, if we do another tenuous connection to Epstein, which you've already outlined how he may be related to Hubbard, who was friends with Jack Parsons. He was doing these rituals with Jack Parsons. He eventually steals Jack Parsons' girlfriend or wife or whatever. They run
The
off
woman from
together.
the ritual, right?
Yes, the
Yeah. Yeah.
Scarlet. So that's called the Scarlet Woman, the woman who is supposed to be the vessel that gives birth to the Moonchild is like the Scarlet Woman. Hubbard steals her away. So it's this whole crazy, unbelievable, kind of hilarious story. Um, but then when you get to Epstein, and then you see we haven't brought this stuff up yet, but he's also very interested in like eugenics and trying to
Mm-hmm.
like they've found like really creepy shit at the ranch that has to do with like um, you know, basically like monitoring pregnancies and gestation and he talks about I believe trying to get like multiple people pregnant and stuff like that. So he has this crazy, not just at the very least eugenic strain of trying to pass on his seed to many people. But again, it seems like there could be enough smoke coming off of that to indicate a sort of occult esoteric goal with that. And is this part of that goal? And I've heard other people try to equate what he was doing with this, but my mind on where I heard this is a little bit foggy to me right now.
Uh, I was not aware of the eugenics stuff until after the video. People pointed it out to me. I think it's very clear. One of the things that I found, again, not in the documentary, and I have it saved here on my computer. So Vicky Ward was the original investigator of Epstein. I think it was a Vanity Fair profile, and it started as her kind of documenting. He's like the playboy of Manhattan. You know, he's the up and coming like cool guy. She's getting into the reporting, and she finds out that I think at first she kind of figures out that he's doing a lot of money laundering, and there's lots of people that have gone to prison that he's like stolen hundreds of millions of dollars from because he was managing their money and all sorts of stuff. She eventually kind of figures out that what he's doing with the women, not to the degree that it would ultimately become, but like this guy is at minimum a predator. Jeffrey Epstein agrees, tells her that he's going to sue her, and he somehow gets a lot of the piece thrown out with Vanity Fair because he has some personal relationship with the guy that runs it, and she's like, I'm going to go publish this somewhere else. And so this is what she's saying. She has a conversation with Epstein privately, and then she's pregnant with twins at the time. And then this is Vicky Ward speaking on a podcast with some website called Capsule. He then made threats about having a witch doctor place a curse on my unborn children. He wanted to know the exact hospital that I was giving birth and when, and upsetting that he had a dossier compiled on my husband and threatened that he could get my husband fired. It's a very strange thing to say that you will have a witch doctor curse unborn children. I mean, I think
you haven't ever done that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like you got $1 billion. You could just like ruin her financially. It's very odd. And the fixation that it's not, I'm going to curse you, which I'm going to curse your unborn children, which is even darker. Not just for the threat itself, but for the symbology of that type of threat. You know, what's interesting is that, and this has been the complaint from people that are you know, more knowledgeable on the documentary, is they're like, not all of these ideas are Crowley. Fair, but what I would say is, you know, out of Crowley comes Wicca, chaos magic. You know, there's a lot of spin-offs there. And I think Epstein was charting some semblance of a new path here. And I think the Parsons thing was his inspiration for doing this. It's just weird stuff. It's like really freaky stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like an inversion of a lot of the principle. Like it seems like he's trying to. So my opinion on the esoteric and occult stuff is this, broadly. I think it's ultimately going to be a reflection of what your own deepest true will and desire is. Like if you're truly trying to do it to, you know, from this point of ego nullification, you know, sort of like what these ancient sages were trying to do with, like in the Greek tradition, they would have called theurgy, where they're trying to essentially like, I want to truly be a clean vessel for divinity to come through and help make this world a better place, right? Like I want to like shrink my ego and I want to connect my mind back up to God essentially, so that God can work through me and I become kind of the highest version of myself that I can become in that kind of way. That's one goal, right? Like that's sort of like the right-hand path of esotericism in the occult. But it's not hard to see how if you have the opposite desire and you want to self-aggrandize, you want to self-divinize, you want to try to turn your ego into a god, how just the exact same principles apply, but in an inverted kind of way. And it
Hmm.
seems like that's 100% what Epstein's goals were. Like you can just look at his ego, his goals, the people he's surrounding himself with, the books he's buying, and it seems like everything is to that end. How can I aggrandize myself to the highest, most prideful, ridiculous degree? And I think you see the kind of both devastation of other people and an ultimate how it's almost like it's a tale as old as time, right? He ends up reaping what he sows and going out in such a, dark, tragic, like pitiful way where he's just
Hmm.
like arrested, his reputation is destroyed. I mean, it almost is uh the Faust's it's like it's a Faustian tale, right? Yeah,
It's
yeah.
interesting that you say that because I think me and you talked about this before, and I'm certainly coming from like a Christian
Yeah.
belief system myself,
Yeah, we should get that,
but
and we should get that on the table just so everybody knows where everyone's coming from. Yeah.
yeah, and I think the thing, a lot of this stuff, it feels very Faustian to me in a lot of ways that it's like um my belief in Christianity is kind of separate from my belief in these kind of like the feeling presence of God, and whether however that shakes out, whether that's miracles or odd happenings. I see it kind of differently because there's just a lot of really documented odd things that are hard to explain, so you have to kind of
Mhm.
like make sense of that. But I think the thing that bothers me most about like the Crowley system is that it feels Faustian in a lot of ways. And I would be curious to know how you feel about it because it's like, if like even tracing Crowley. So you have Crowley, he picks up like the do it that will from Regulus, who takes it from Augustine. It's kind of this evolution of this idea. There's like an element of like he brings in kind of this like libertarian kind of
Mhm.
ultimate will. I don't know, and this
But
is certainly
do what thou will is actually part of the statement, which is like do what thou will, love is the law, love under will, or something like that. So
which
there,
is what
yeah,
he's like inverting it. So right, like do you like so Augustine has love and do as thou will. So like
yeah.
under the love of God, and then there is I forget his first name. His last name is Regulus. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I actually don't.
Okay, so it's this guy. He writes this kind of satirical story about a monastery that it's kind of the introduction of the like this humanist idea instead of the Augustine idea that
Hmm.
like original sin you must love through the love of God, and that's how you will do the will of God. He takes it and he says I forget his exact phrasing, but he takes it into a more humanist direction where basically humans are ultimately good. So love, do as that will, love is the law. Crowley spins it, and it keeps getting
Hmm.
spun across time. And the thing about Crowley, I don't know. There's an element of like he kind of leans into, and I think he does this purposefully, and it's partially probably just like press, but like he grows up in a Christian household.
Yeah.
He's a horrible kid. His mom calls him the Beast, and so he takes that as like he loves that, right? In later
Hmm.
life, he kind of attaches
Yeah.
himself to that moniker,
Yeah.
and strangely, when he goes to Cairo and he gets
The download.
the book of the law from
Yeah.
Awis, his wife, so they're there on the honeymoon, they go to some Egyptian museum, and his wife is saying like they're waiting for you, you need to go speak to these beings, they have a message for you.
Hmm.
And when she's telling this to him, he is sitting at some exhibit of some tablet or something, and the museum tag is 666. So
Yeah.
he takes that as a sign that it's meant for him. And this is certainly like my Christian background, but I'm like, there is like a serendipitous nature to that feels like scary to
Right.
me, you know?
For
And I'm
sure.
like,
Yeah.
and uh, I think like the ultimate like practice for anything would just be to it has to come from a place of like full
Yeah.
love. You know, there's
Right.
like there's he in particular, you know, and he's responsible for his own, what does he call it, an auto hagiography. He's making his own, you know, exaggerated story of a saint of himself. um I'm curious to know what you think about, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
he I
Well,
find him dark in
I'm not
interesting
some like
ways.
apologist for Crowley at all. I just try to have like a nuanced take on things that I'm not an expert in. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, yeah.
Have you ever heard of Lon Milo Duquette?
Mm-mm.
He's a living OTO, high ranking OTO guy. And I've read a couple of his books and I've, watched some of his videos, and he just comes off as the most humble, likable, knowledgeable guy. And he's written a biography on Crowley that I think takes a much more nuanced take, but at the same time, he's not trying to say like I agree 100% with everything he did.
Mhm.
That's where my nuance comes from. Is just I think there
Yeah.
are like very smart people who know his true desires better than I do, and if you just take the most cartoonish examples of his debauchery, it looks absolutely insane, and he seems like an
Mhm.
evil, out of control person. But I also don't want to reduce a person who clearly is like he has this giant body of work and was a very prolific writer, and seems to have been writing in a number of registers from the most like aggressively outlandish debaucherous kind of place, but also the like holiest, most sincere, like I'm really trying to get to the secrets of the universe kind of place.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I just don't know
No, yeah, for sure.
what the answer is there. But yeah, dude, there does seem to be a lot of devastation in his wake, and he himself seems to be like another example of this Faustian type
Yeah.
character who doesn't,
Yeah.
he doesn't die, in a great place. It seems like he again like sort of like squandered his wealth and ran afoul of a lot of people, got kicked out of the Golden Dawn and all of this kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know what I think about him. I just try to be like, I don't know what I don't know, and
Yeah,
I'm
no, no,
gonna
no.
be
And I should say
cool
that it's
there.
not like me like trying to be ugly to anybody who is you know, participation
Yeah.
in these things or looking at these things. But he is a character I find very interesting because there's like this there's certainly like the media personality of him, but it's you know, he ends up broke and on heroin. It's just
Yeah.
like it's a dark story.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some
Uh,
story. I'm trying to remember who told me this. But there's some story about like he literally got like kicked down the stairs or something by like another member of the Golden Dawn when he got kicked out or something like that. So yeah, there's definitely a history of him being, rejected and sort of like being an outcast. That seems to be clear. And I think, that maybe that's where he's coming from in a lot of these inversions, is him feeling like I don't belong in any of these places. And I think a
mhm.
lot of people, that's why a lot of people end up exploring the occult and the esoteric, right? Because they feel like
Mhm.
an outcast and like I don't
Yeah.
belong in these mainstream religions. I don't like this way of thinking of divinity. I don't feel seen by thinking of like these exoteric, but by the way these exoteric religions talk about the divine. So I'm going to do the opposite. And I think that's
Mhm.
what he's doing, right? Like he's trying to invert a lot of these um normally sacred things to like I don't know. I think that's the other thing too, is how much of it is him trying to be countercultural and trying to be spooky, because
I think a lot of it.
that's part of the esoteric and the occult that I don't like. I was just goofing on this with my friend Ike Baker, who is very serious esotericist himself. I was telling you about him a little bit, saying I think it'd be interesting to hear you guys talk, but um, he doesn't like that either. This sort of like edge lordy,
Mhm.
dark. Um, I listen to metal, so now I'm going to get into the like occult kind of
Anton
vibe.
LaVey.
Right. Like I'm also a fan of heavy music, by the way. But yeah. So yeah, dude, there's just so much cultural baggage and social, posing going on, and it's hard to separate all of it. And I think in a weird way, Crowley was kind of like the human manifestation of all of this complexity from what it
Hmm.
seems like to me. But again, I'm definitely not an apologist for him. I could totally 180 and be like, yeah, you know what? I read everything about him and he seems like a piece of shit. Like that might be the case too. I don't know, man. I really don't know.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to put you in a corner. I was just curious because it's like I don't know. There's an element to him that is just odd, you
For
know.
sure. No question. No question. Um,
Just the all of it mixed together is just a very odd story.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, when we're talking about um, literally believing that you are essentially the prophet of a new age, and you're going to bring about this age shift through these magical workings that you are inventing slash have access to or rediscovered, whatever. That's crazy stuff. It's interesting
Hmm.
stuff, and it's stuff where I'm like, whoa, I think there could be a kernel of truth to some of this. But again, if you don't have the highest possible, if your disposition is not clean and in the right place, you have no business like playing in these waters. I believe. I think there's so much education and purification, and I think these real people who would really be doing this kind of stuff would probably be like ascetics who we would like never hear their names. They'd be like living
Yeah.
somewhere isolated, you know, or I don't know. I don't know. That's just the sense that I have.
Can I ask you a question? Just because you're much more knowledgeable in this area than me. Do you like? To me, it feels like there is a spiritual difference in like the meditative practices of kind of like
Hmm.
looking for God or light or something along those lines versus I think the thing that makes me uncomfortable about a lot of this stuff is the like invoking and evoking this idea of like I'm going to be protected in the circle but I have command over this thing. I think it feels different to me. Like
Hmm.
I'm just curious if you do you sense a difference in it or maybe like a safety or a morality in the
Yeah.
differences because the meditation piece feels very honest and
Yeah.
egoless in a way, or the the
Yeah.
Robert Monroe or even psychedelics done without kind of there's it's funny to me all these people getting locked out of the the DMT
Oh
realm.
yeah, dude. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. I
but
got to drop
if
that in the video. Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
feels a little it feels different to me in the way
Hmm.
you approach it. And I'm just curious to know what you think about that.
Yeah. Are you which group are you lumping psychedelics in with the meditative or
No, the
the?
meditative. It feels
Yeah.
much more open. It feels different to me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, man, because like I'm definitely I've been sucked into and just been incredibly impressed by the Platonic tradition and sort of so again this for people that don't know, this tradition that obviously starts with Plato, probably doesn't even really start with Plato. Like he's probably carrying the torch for like uh, um, Pythagoras and other mystery traditions and ancient Egyptian strains and stuff like that. But anyway, by the time this lineage matures and you get to like Neoplatonism, it's interesting because you have sort of nexus points of both approaches. Like you have this guy like Plotinus, who's sort of the most well-known Neoplatonist, and he's doing the meditative, you know, basically sit down, remove the stains of the outside world, go inward, and you will eventually experience henosis. You'll
Mhm.
go back to the one that like the thing above everything, and that's the method, that's the goal. And yes, he was also this very studious, very accomplished speaker, teacher, whatever. And then you have this figure of Iamblichus, who's like the next main Platonist who comes after him. And while they agree on a lot, his technique is all about ritual and all about
Mm.
having to do what today absolutely looks like the roots of Western esoteric magical practices. And he called this
Interesting.
practice theurgy. And you needed to do this evocation of these things because he believed metaphysically what's going on is there's so much metaphysical stuff to unpack, but he believed essentially that human souls were basically of this order that is kind of stuck. So he thought the whole idea of what Plotinus was proposing was misguided, like this idea of taking your human soul and ascending it back up to the primordial one. You can't do that because the human soul is of this like fundamentally different quality and part of the hierarchy. So what you needed to do is essentially draw divinity down. Not, you can't go up, you have to draw divinity down. So you have to use this whole, almost more like John Dee kind of approach where you need to bring stuff to you, and then through that your soul can be elevated, but you don't have the power to bring your soul back to that level of reality. So you've got to like evoke different intermediary beings. And this is interesting because like the modern idea of demon didn't exist in the same way, where they considered like daimones to be these sort of go-between intelligences between the higher and the lower. So you had daimones that were responsible for everything from just natural processes to literally being like what we would consider today to be angels, because they're literally like these intermediary messenger beings. So you had to have these intermediary beings that were like from divinity come down to you, because you can't as a human soul get to that level. So it just all depends on what you think is going on metaphysically and how that's done. And I don't know, I'm attracted by both things, and I feel like there could be a sort of midpoint there, but I find it super fascinating, that's for sure.
It is fascinating because I think the idea of like the angels and demons, I think there are like spiritual forces that we can interact with, which is very scary. It's a very like it's a reality shattering idea. It's like when you kind of like swallow like the faith pill in any capacity, you're like, it gets weird. It's like a very different world once you kind of are in that space.
Yeah. And sort of adjacent to this is another topic we have to bring up, which is like essentially broadly the alien topic, right? Because for most people, how if people who think of aliens as extraterrestrials who are literally getting in a ship and coming here from another dimension, it's sort of like a non sequitur, right? Or it smells of like, oh, you're just trying to lump everything into angels and demons, and you're trying to have this fit your worldview. So that's what it is. But there's a way more nuanced take than that I think, I don't want to say we 100% share, because I don't know exactly what your view is, but I think we share at least partially in our view of the phenomenon, and that there's a whole other take. And this is a take proposed by people like Pasulka, a take proposed by people like Jacques Vallée, John Keel. And I'll let you take it from there, because I'm rambling too much.
No, those three are like kind of certainly where I land. The aliens thing is really interesting. So I've always been interested in aliens, just, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Just it's just a fun idea.
Have you seen Disclosure Day?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
is it good?
Okay. I have really complicated thoughts on it. Like very, I won't go deep into this now because I don't want to derail you, but maybe we can come back to it. And plus, I don't want to just spew out spoilers. Maybe this would be a good end of the podcast thing where people can be like, okay, I either want to hear this or I don't want to hear it. But I'll say this. There were times watching it where I felt like, I think this is something LARPing as a movie. I don't think the primary goal was
it was actual disclosure.
I honestly think that's part of what was being done. Like there were like Obama came to the set, and just like, there's things that make it feel kind of like this historic moment that is wearing the skin of a movie, but really it is a sort of narrative being pushed out, I think. And you can view, and I'm not necessarily saying that there's malicious psyop intent there, and I'm also not saying there's not. I'm also not saying there's not.
I would not be surprised. A lot of his movies feel like psyops.
Yeah, dude. So I'll leave that there for now. But yeah, continue.
Okay. Let me think about where I was.
We just brought up Keel, Vallée, and Pasulka, and you said, yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of backwards into that view. I had originally kind of just thought aliens were fun. You know, who knows if they're real or not. But like a lot of this stuff, so I came back to my faith, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, and I started reading the early church fathers, mystics, saints, and things like that, and I was blown away by the oddness of the stories.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are like super highly documented. You know, the famous case that Pasolka always brings up is Saint Teresa of Avila.
Yeah.
And she has these real life encounters with angels. They are bizarre. They're not like what you would imagine as angels. It's like this 4 feet little thing next to her bed, and it has a spear with a fire on the end of it, and it sticks it in her side. And that matches exactly to the description of a case that John Mack documents in Abduction. Pasolka goes out to speak to this guy that John Mack had interviewed, and John Mack describes it in the book as like this scary encounter with this otherworldly alien. Pasolka talks to him, and he didn't have that description. He said that that was kind of a John Mack extrapolation spin on what he had originally said, that he said he felt like it was like love. He said it was painful, but there was like this purification element, and then he felt it was angelic in nature. And I was like, man, that's really odd that this old encounter matches this alien encounter. There's other stuff.
Yeah, and there's also, again, not to derail you, but there's also like what could be conceived of as a sort of operative kind of thing going on there with being like stabbed by something, right? Like,
Yeah.
Could that be something that could also be an idea that I've overused, but it's such an important idea, and it's core to this whole interdimensional kind of hypothesis, is that the phenomenon shapeshifts, and the way it comes to you is different through different ages. So now many people are seeing it as extraterrestrials. Maybe in the Middle Ages, people were seeing angels. Maybe some people still see angels. Some people demons, whatever. So that could be part of what's going on. And under a slightly different POV, that could seem like some sort of surgical event, right? Like being stabbed by a spear or something.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I landed on this idea of being in kind of that camp, is that Vallée does a great job of this. This thing, the outlines of the story stay the same, but it changes form throughout all of these ages. You have the fairy lore, which is just like dead ringer for alien stories. I mean, you tell that to people and it sounds stupid, but if you go read these firsthand accounts, it's like, you know, even they describe them as having crafts, and they have these they call them the fairy circles, and it's kind of the outline of these crafts, and they have these odd encounters, and some of the undercounted the undertold stories is like the offering of food, and they have the same foods are offered throughout time. You have the little biscuits, you know, that's, I forget the guy's name, it's a common alien story now. I think Chris Ramsey has talked about it.
They're like the little pancake things, right?
The little pancakes.
Yeah.
Fairies also have stories of the offering of the pancakes. That's
weird.
what they eat. Yeah, and you can trace things like that, and you can trace it all the way back to lots of different saint stories. Saint Benedict of Nursia, there's a bishop nearby who dies, and he gets this kind of vision that this man has died, and he goes to his window to pray, and he sees like a ghost of this guy being floated up into the sky with an orb. There's the case of, have you ever done much research on Fatima?
I know the broad strokes, yeah, but not
you should
not
find
a ton
somebody
of
to talk about
research,
that, because it's like, it is the case for this, because there's pretty good evidence on both sides. Like, you know, the Catholics claim it as a miracle, the other side claim it as like the most highly documented UFO encounter of all time. There's like 70,000 people that see this, and there's this radiant woman, but the way that they describe Mary is very odd. She's like 4.5 feet tall, and it's just bizarre, and she speaks, but her mouth doesn't move, and it's just strange. And I think there is an element of, I think the spiritual interdimensional model makes a lot more sense to me than travelers from other planets. I think where it gets harder to explain is the crafts themselves, the physicality of
Yes,
it. But I don't know how to square that
dude.
because interdimensionality as an idea is kind of like
Hmm.
it's hard to understand.
I'm in the exact same place, specifically with respect to what you just said. I gave this talk at Contact in the Desert, and I'm also working on this kind of big thesis statement video about the phenomenon and this basically, and also comparing it to certain esoteric practices that seem to um, culminate in figures of light or orbs of light or different kinds of light forms showing up. So that Neoplatonists I mentioned earlier, Iamblichus, but also other people who are doing these theurgic practices, whenever he would talk about, so he talks about the various manifestations that would occur to the theurgist. So the person, so theurgy translates to something like divine working, working with divinity, and so they believed essentially, that reality was sort of this multi-dimensional structure where at the top of which you have the one, right? Which you could call the one God, but it's more like this um it's like this universal monadic element of reality that everything participates in. Like we're descended from this one thing. And a lot of them were very apophatic about it. They did not like to say they didn't like to attribute anything to it other than its goodness. Like it is this fundamental thing that is good, and you don't say anything else about it, because as soon as you say something about it, it's like you're kind of weakening it. You're saying it's this and it's not that, and as soon as you say that it's this and it's not that, it's not the one anymore, right? It's you've kind of weakened its ontological status by giving it too many qualities. And then from there, that thing emanates outward into different forms. So they believed from there you got these basically like these first few gods that you could think of as having qualities, like archetypal qualities, and then from there it just goes down and down and down until you get to the densest sort of part of reality, which is this material realm, um, where we still have traces of this oneness within all of us, but we're very far from the origin point, basically. So they believe there was this caste of intermediary beings. For Iamblichus, it was like angels, daimones, um, archons, heroes. There might be a couple of other ones, but he describes how these things show up, and every single one of them shows up essentially as what sounds like orbs of different kinds of light. And,
Hmm.
and again, how similar does that sound to so many UFO stories, man? Like the vast majority of people who are seeing weird stuff out there are seeing weird lights flying around in strange ways.
Hmm.
And often when they come closer, they appear to be orbs, right? So there's this very interesting overlap there. Um, but I 100% agree with you that I don't understand where the physical craft come into play. And the problem again is like, what stories do you put stock in, right? Like who, like what authorities on this topic do you listen to? Because it certainly sounds like from a mainstream disclosure narrative standpoint, you watch Age of Disclosure. Oh my God, there is this uh you know there is this legacy program, and all of the big aerospace contractors are in on it, and they've all picked up physical materials. And so I mean, if that is true, I don't understand how this seems to comport with what we've been hearing about since time immemorial, with um, strange lights and things that seem to be more consciousness based. And I have some theories. I think my favorite theory right now is that we're seeing a weird strain of probably a nexus of both physical engineering and the esoteric, like somehow combined into an object. Like we're seeing
Mm,
some
that's
kind of
interesting.
almost like flying talismans or something like that, that have
Yeah.
that are in this extremely hidden strain of technology and history. And one of the most interesting flashpoints of that potentially is the Nazis in World War II. And Peter Levenda has done like an insane amount of research and work to this effect, kind of arguing that, all the weird occult stuff that the Nazis were into may have actually culminated in some very weird technologies that we are aware of through all of the, paperclip scientists and stuff like that. And that may explain all of the really strange sightings that you get basically like right in the decade following World War II is like, is these physical craft actually appearing everywhere for the first time. And also that explains why they crash, right? Because if they really are these hyper advanced civilizations that are millions of years more advanced than us, the idea that their craft are crashing is kind of insane, right? It's kind of hard to imagine. But it wouldn't be hard to imagine that if this is some new, weird, novel strain of esoteric technology, that it would, one, have a lot of strange effects that have something to do with consciousness, that look magical, that look weird, but also that it's not foolproof, right? That there's still human error built into these things, and that's why they're crashing. So that's a very nutshelled, very terrible explanation, but that is one at least sexy possibility to me, is that maybe you get like a combination of engineering and high weirdness and the esoteric all smashed in to some weird strain of technology, and that's what physical UFOs are. I don't know.
I'll spoil my own video, and maybe people can go check it out once it's out. I'm working on it right now, but one of the videos that I'm working on is there's this really odd device that the Vatican supposedly had called the chronosphere, and
I've heard about this.
To see into the past, and it's been debunked, and and there was fake photos. The priest on his deathbed says it was not debunked. The Vatican made me put out fake photos. Whoa. But what's interesting is that the people who he supposedly built this with, it's like von Braun, and all of the people connect tangentially to the Magenta crash, which supposedly the Vatican helped. Mussolini gets it. The Vatican helps get it over to the United States, to the OSS, I think at the time. It wasn't the CIA yet. But it is interesting because I think the Magenta crash is like the nexus point. The people that were there, it was like one of them goes and does the chronosphere. One of the guys ends up creating CERN. One of the guys is connected to like MK Ultra. Like it's like a very weird thing. I don't know how to feel about the crafts. Sometimes I'm just like, the stuff is so weird. I'm just like, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out eventually. It's not worth like losing sleep over. But the way that and this is kind of true across a lot of my videos, is like when I see something show up in several cultures all over the planet, there's something going on, right? Like there's the flying crafts in Hinduism. There's these, the Cherokee have the moon-eyed people, and there's all these kind of weird things that kind of overlap. And every time you see that, whether it's like a global flood, which is looking much more likely than it used to, the Nephilim, any of these things, it's like if every society on Earth throughout time lands on this very similar idea, it has to. There's something there. In these, it's fairies, or it's jinn, or it's angels and demons, and I think they all kind of speak to this similar thing of this kind of real but not real, this nebulous kind of shifting thing. Even and this is the way that I look at it, and this is drawn from my worldview, but like the Bible, people talk about angels, which is like largely a misnomer. The word angel is describing a particular type of angel, but there's all these different ranks of angels. They look different, they have different roles. But then even beyond the idea of angel, there's the Paul warns of the elemental spirits, and that they are the spirits that are local to a land, and that they control the rivers and the seas. And it's like these, you have to be, and what's even more interesting is that you go later into the church fathers, and they're debating these elemental spirits. Are these good guys or bad guys?
Right.
Because we know them to be real, and it's like there's a and And I think that's true of a lot of like early religious writings, is that they speak about these things like, oh, we know these jinns to be real. It's not even really a question of it's not
Mhm.
some like, now we get there because we're like sophisticated, we have to reason our way to these like spiritual
Right.
ideas. But for these early people, it was a present reality to them that like, oh, of course the elemental spirits that haunt the
Yeah.
river are real.
I agree, man. And I think it's funny because we have this modern hubris now where we think we've disproved all of this stuff, or we haven't found it through science, so therefore it can't be real. But these are the people who actually like really lived close to the land. Like these are the people who
Hmm.
actually really were interfacing with their environment in ways that we really don't by and large
Hmm.
anymore. We live essentially in these protected little fiefdoms of humanity where we cut ourselves off from nature, we try to control everything, we try to, basically not let the natural elements interfere with what we want to do. We're like the little demiurges of our own,
Hmm.
neighborhoods. And then we want to talk about what's real beyond those borders when we have no fucking idea because we don't go out there by and large, unless you're the kind of person who is, a very tiny percentage of the population. And not only did they do that, they just had different understandings about consciousness, and they engaged in different practices. They had different ideas to pull from. One of the core points of my talk actually is about the sense making aspect of all of this, because I think that like one of the problems we have when we're trying to understand the phenomenon is we either think in terms of like, oh, it is either physically real and we can apply the scientific method to it and that will make us understand it, or it's of a spiritual rank and that's it. Like it has to be one or the other.
Hmm.
And um, you try to sort of exert ontological superiority over one or the other to state whether it's real or not, or how it's real, or by what metric. But I think looking at reality in this kind of multi-dimensional way, it like the way the Platonists used to do it, where like we are all fundamentally one, right? Like that is part of what they say.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean there's not also other levels and kinds of reality. Like we are also separate in a way that really matters. Like if someone ran in this room and punched me in the face right now, you would
Hmm.
not feel it and I would feel it. And that would
Yeah.
matter a lot to me, right? So there are like kinds of separation that still matter a lot, whether we're talking about the ultimate level of reality or we're not. And I think when you start thinking about the phenomenon in that kind of a way, where you're like, okay, not only could those things be multidimensional and existing in multiple forms and multiple manifestations, but we also exist in that same reality. And we forget, like, we're also participating in all of these realms we've basically lost touch with, right? And some
Hmm.
of these realms, I think, are what you're describing with these elemental forces. Like, we stop asking fundamental questions about like why things are the way they are, right? Like what, like, and we try to explain it all through like physical processes and gradualism, and we forget that there's a lot more to reality than that, right? And all you need
Hmm.
to do is like alter your consciousness to I believe um dilate the scope of what you're able to perceive, and at least come into very visceral contact with the reality that you are a lot more multidimensional than you think you are. You have capacities that you forgot you have. You have things you can train that you didn't know you could train. And yeah, I think we just have this very hubristic posture because we figured out how to get enough water in food and make our bodies fat and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And I think that we're, by and large, we have a very juvenile way of looking at and conceiving of reality. And I think if we want to try to explain something as crazy as the UFO phenomenon and high weirdness through that little tiny peephole, I think we're fooling ourselves totally.
Have you ever read 4,000 Weeks? It's like a self-help
No,
book.
no.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's like a really interesting book. It's this book. It basically the pitch is that on average most people live 4,000 weeks, and by
Mhm.
the time you've read this book, you only have like 2,000 weeks left. But one of the things, it's a great book, and I'm not much for like those types of books, but it's like a really interesting kind of spiritual take on the idea of productivity. But one of the things that he covers in this book is the idea, he calls it deep time.
Yeah.
And he talks about that the idea of productivity in the modern sense, or I'm late for something, or the sense of urgency, is really it wasn't really invented until trains, because that was the first time we had to have a shared time system, so you would know you're leaving one time zone into another, and that's how you can keep track of where these trains are. But before that, these people were measuring their time by days. What do I have to do today to stay alive? What do I have to do across the season? So it's a time that's measured primarily by days, weeks, and seasons, and it doesn't go much further than that. And the structure of that, if you think about how much that is like placed upon our consciousness, this idea of like hurriedness is built into our DNA now. That's hard in a way that we can't even comprehend. It's like one of those things that's like you don't really think about how much the language you speak constructs your worldview, because it's totally invisible to you. And I think time does the same thing. And I think a lot of these like older people and cultures, when a lot of your time is built around silence. It's built around, there's no, music. They're living by the beats of the earth. They're living by the sun. And I think that type of living naturally puts you in a headspace where you can feel spiritual things, where you can feel the presence of God, or feel the presence of evil. I think that, and it's very hard to get that now, and that's why everybody wants to go to yoga retreats, and meditation's a big thing, and I think it's good, but I think that's why we miss so much of it now. And I totally agree with you that it really bothers me, the separation between real and not real, because it's very nebulous. It's like the idea of something being real is like we have to get there through language in the first place, and we're kind of like putting a meaning on this thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our understanding of the same thing is the same. And it's like this idea of realness, because I totally agree that I think there's real things, like the materialist idea. It's like you're in love with your kids. I would say it's just
hopefully not in love with your kids, but yeah.
You love your kids, yeah. You love your kids. You love your wife, whatever it may be. They say it's just like chemicals, like it's just chemicals cascading in the brain. But it's something more than that. You can feel that it's something more than that. That might be how it's happening, but it's like it speaks to something else. And I don't think it's just biology. I think it's a force that you're interacting with. That's kind of where I land in a lot of that stuff. Is there is a realness, and you can feel it in the way that you feel about your parents, or just when you've done something intentional and you've lived according to your values. You can feel that was the right. Like there's you settle into your body that you have lived in accordance with what you were supposed to be doing, and it's pulling you in a direction.
Totally, man. Yeah. And you know what sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say like that, your point earlier about, living closer to these natural rhythms and these natural, I would say, intelligences and kinds of knowing that I think we forgot we even had. Again, I think until if you go into these more expanded states of consciousness, you might get a glimpse of them. And even just by getting a glimpse of them, you don't have great fluency with it. And you realize like, oh, this is why shamans existed, because like they were trained in just like interacting with this realm and understanding this realm and knowing how to traverse this realm. And this might seem like a little bit of a left turn, but I think it's extremely related in ways that are underexplored. Have you gone down that rabbit hole of like the psionic assets lore at all?
No.
Oh, dude, you'll find this interesting. So did you didn't see the Jake Barber interview? Oh, okay, dude. So I find him to be one of the most interesting whistleblowers, and I'll really nutshell this because I've talked about it a lot on the channel. But he did an interview with Ross Coldheart maybe a year and a half ago, where he claimed to be this, he is this former tier 1 operator, helicopter pilot guy who, they verified his identity, all of this stuff. All these other military personnel came forward to say this guy is who he says he is. One guy was even a colonel who came forward saying, like, yes, this is him. He claimed to have been involved in crash retrieval, been sent like as a helicopter pilot to go recover craft, but also claimed to have had crazy psychical experiences when he was approaching these craft, like feeling like he was
Really?
in touch with this divine feminine force that made him lose control of his emotions, and it felt like his
Really? Wow.
mother and loving and sadness and this like very sacred thing. But he also claims that they use these people he called psionic assets to essentially reach out to these consciousnesses and make them appear in the form of craft. And then the craziest claim of all is he claimed that once these things were attracted, that they use these pulse microwave weapons basically to down the craft, to like make them fall out of the sky. And then for the further reaches of the lore is they actually go to third world countries and into disaster areas to try to recruit and find people who would be good at this, specifically for the reason you said, because these people are actually in touch with their environment, and they are
Wow.
closer to these natural forces in this, I guess you could say, this sort of like psychical web of the like the world soul or something. And they understand innately more how to tap into this thing, and we in the West by and large have lost our connection to it. It's like that's completely atrophied, whatever that skill is. So yeah, that's an element of this lore that, again, do you put stock in it? I don't know. Barber
Wow.
strikes me as a very believable guy, and I've also spoken with a couple people who claim to be these psionic assets, and it's really hard to separate out because now it's like, oh, I'm a psion. It's cool to say, right? It's cool
Yeah.
to say I'm a psionic asset, and like you get all this attention. So, do you believe those people or not? I don't know, but I think something directionally makes sense to that effect. Directionally makes sense, um particularly with the kind of worldview that we're talking about, that like whatever we're interacting with, it's probably this multi-dimensional, trans-dimensional kind of thing that can manifest in physical forms but maybe is not primarily physical.
That's fascinating. That's a really cool idea. It's crazy that they look for people in the third world to do that. That's nuts. I totally believe that.
If true, yeah, if true.
It makes sense. I mean, it seems kind of self-evident to me, that there is some consciousness element to it. There has to be. Like it's
Yeah.
there's too many reports of it. It's just too common of an idea. Wow, that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, it reminds me, one of your videos that I watched this morning actually was on this, part of it at least was on this idea of second sight and being able to actually perceive this other realm and these other beings, right? Like, because again, if we are in a modern POV cut off from this world, in some ways that's a huge tragedy. And I think in other ways it's probably um like protective in a certain way, because you don't have to worry about all of that stuff. It doesn't have to occupy your psyche. And if it did, if you asked me right now, hey, would you want the ability, do you want this ability? I would say yes, I would, because I want truth. I want to know what's out there. I want to be able to like interact with these things. But I also think that is an incredible Pandora's box, right? Like if you suddenly became aware of the reality of there being disincarnate intelligences all over the place, and you have to like constantly discern whether or not they have your best interest in mind, that would be insane, dude.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I would want it. I don't think I don't know. It's one of those things. It's like if it's like the ring of power. It's like, I'd be scared. There's like an element, but I'd be scared to like grab it.
Right.
So this idea comes up for me a lot across my videos. So Second Sight, I did a video on fairies and aliens, and then I did another video on telepathy. And I kind of took a different approach on it. It was because of the what was the telepathy tapes, the podcast that was a great podcast. But I kind of take this idea, I kind of take it into a more of a reincarnation route, because there's these people that have, supposedly been reincarnated heavily documented, even kind of like Western cases of these kids being born and they
Yeah.
remember the lives and, the wives and children of some World War II. They remember everything on the airplane and they're 5 years old and all these different kind of ideas. And General Patton was supposedly reincarnated, according to him. A lot of people
Whoa.
don't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you can go read the diaries of General Patton. He thought that he had been reincarnated several times, that he was like a Carthaginian soldier and he was a Roman soldier, and he said that he had fought in all of these wars, and he remembered, and supposedly like when he's out there in World War II, he's describing lands that he had fought before, and he actually knew some stuff about the land that wasn't he wouldn't have known without being there. And he in the movie, the old movie about Patton, they have a scene where he's describing all the women and children, in some battle that he was in, and they just kind of do it as a passing kind of thing because Patton was odd, but he truly believed that he was reincarnated. And the idea that I kind of come to, and I think it's connected to the second sight idea, is that I think there is I think about consciousness as almost like a personalized radio signal from your brain. I think of us as much more of receivers than consciousness emanates directly. I think the brain is much more of a receiver. And then there's people that either by accident or through training of some capacity can broaden their signal. And so with these reincarnated cases of Patton, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody who believes in reincarnation, but this is just my kind of theory, is that Patton was so his soul was so connected to warfare and to being a soldier that he's picking up these past lives of people that were in that same soldier's mindset. And or just by accident a kid is born and his signals kind of matching with some guy in a different era. And I think second sight's a similar idea, where second sight specifically, the way that it's described in the fairy lore, is that it runs within families. It has to be a family connection, but more important than the family connection, it's family connection across one piece of land for an extended period of time. So there is a familial knowing
Yeah, it's
that,
like a
that is
shamanistic
connected. Yeah, that has to be
kind of.
connected to the land. So you have to go back several generations, and you've all been on this one hill in Scotland. And then only these people will have the ability to see the elemental spirits, the fairies of the land. And I find that those ideas are very similar, even to the Stephen Greer, I forget what he calls it, the
CE5.
CE5 idea of this kind of knowing that goes on that allows you to kind of see into these areas. There's an intimacy that has to be there, and an intention that has to be there so you can see into these strange things.
Yeah. No, I think Keel actually uses. I love Keel, but he also frustrates me because I think he at times congeals topics conveniently.
He's an entertainer.
For sure. But I do think, again, one of these guys who I think is brilliant and directionally totally right, which is that to again restate his sort of ultra terrestrial hypothesis, as he calls it, is there are whatever this thing that we perceived, most people think of as the ET phenomenon and whatever. Whatever it really is, it's not actually extraterrestrial. It's actually what he calls ultra terrestrial, meaning that it's coming from extended layers of the electromagnetic spectrum that we don't perceive or understand, and that there are intelligences in this, what he calls super spectrum, that can manifest on our level in all kinds of very weird ways. From, and one of his arguments, which I think is a fair point, is if you're going to believe in UFOs and all of these stories, how are you not going to believe in other kinds of high weirdness that people have purported to see for a long time, like cryptids and other strange things and events going on in places that just don't make sense? And his argument is that is emblematic of these ultra terrestrials, is that when there are these window areas or these kind of flap times where all this stuff is happening, you're kind of seeing these intelligences interacting with our layer of reality in ways that we normally don't see. So that obviously is very close, I think, to what we're talking about. But where it starts to frustrate me, but I also find it interesting, is he at times does call it, he does compare it to demons, he does compare it to elementals, but it's like, let's be a little more specific about what we're saying here, right? And maybe he's making a good point, you know, through another way of looking at it, and this gets back into people like Valet as well, is that maybe we need to start thinking like trying to evolve these concepts if we want to understand them better. And we need to like view the phenomenon a little bit like in this carrot and stick way that Valet talks about a lot, which is like how can in your era with your new ways of understanding can you understand this better than in past times? But also I think we need to make sure we don't go the other direction and assume that now we know better and these old ways of seeing are now totally irrelevant, right? Like how do
Mhm.
we mesh our modern understanding with old understandings to try to create a newer, better understanding? And I don't know. I don't know. I think Keel was on that track. I think Valet is on that track. Um, but I think it's a very open question.
I kind of default on the old. Obviously, it's like if where you can improve, you should improve. I think the great intellectual sin of our time is it bothers me so much that we think of ourselves as like the pinnacle of intelligence and humanity, and it's like, I don't think so, man. Like, I mean, in certain ways, surely, medicine or whatever, but there's like, we've lost so much. I mean, you can just
Yeah, for
see
sure.
what we've lost just over one lifetime. I think that the greater risk is it really bothers me when people try to like scientific, they put all this data on it and it's cool and we should have that and we should collect it. But it's, I did this video about owls and the phenomenon and aliens. And I did it.
I saw the thumbnail, but I didn't watch it. But yeah, I want to hear about it.
And it connects to this idea of when we don't look at the symbolic or spiritual or ancient way of viewing these things, we're actually missing like a core chunk of it. Because the owl thing is that it's like one of the most consistent experiences that come up when you talk to people that have had alien experiences. And there's a great book which kind of inspired the video, The Messengers by Mike Cleland. But he tells the story of he's in Vegas, he's at some like abduction support group, and some guy is nervous to talk. He eventually speaks up and he's like, I keep having weird experiences with owls. Is that common? And everybody in the group raises their hand. And there's thousands of these cases where people that have had experiences tend to have owls that follow them, or they see 4 foot tall owls, or they see owls at the end of their bed. And it's like this reoccurring theme. And so the idea of my video, and I think this is true of lots of other symbols that kind of come up, is when we disregard like the symbolic connection to these things, we're missing what they're communicating to us in a way. This the owl already sits in this kind of in between world, and it's that way across cultures. It's the guardian of the night. They sit in between the worlds, the day and the night. It's the the icon for Athena. It's the the watchers for the Cherokee. It's speaking to us by. The owl the alien could come in several different forms, and it does, and it was interesting that in Disclosure Day he chooses the deer, and I think that's a fairly common one, but it speaks to, it's not just like hiding its form as an owl, it's telling you something about itself, and it's communicating the type of where it sits in relation to you, both as how it sees itself and how it wants you to see him. And it's the same is true of like the valet idea of how it changes over time, how it communicates in your cultural language. I think that there's something to be learned in these, whatever we interact with it is ultimately, it's little like hints about like, this is who I am.
1,000%. Yeah.
And we miss a lot of that because it doesn't even like go into, we're like, wow, owl story, but it doesn't even communicate to us, as we don't think symbolically like that anymore unless you're deeply into this stuff or you're into like
Jung.
religion
Yeah.
in kind of a very ancient sense. We miss all of that. And it's like the world is very weird, and symbols are the primary mode of communication, especially for a thing that's kind of outside of our intelligence. It's going to communicate to a subconscious level, which will primarily be symbols. So it's like, what's the Manly P. Hall? It's that symbols are divisive because they are meant to communicate to those. It communicates an idea to those who understand it, and it hides the idea to everybody who doesn't.
Yeah, well
And
said,
that's how
dude. Yeah.
I see a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I love Manly P. Hall. And you've sort of incidentally just pointed out why I think like esotericism and occulted wisdom, in the true sense of it, meaning like hidden, is innately necessary, but it's also self-hiding, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't have to, like if I put a symbol up that, like the flower of life or something that's been on temples like across cultures, or like the upright pentagram or something, like these are symbols that have literally been from as far east as you can go to as far west as you can go, probably like further back than we even know of. And you can project all kinds of like whatever you think it means onto it, but it's always going to be this weird midpoint between you and whatever the truth of it is. And yeah, to your point, unless you're into this stuff and you have this curious disposition and you want to develop that mythopoetic vision,
Hmm.
you're not going to get it. And that's why I love people like Jung, who, they came from this materialist Western POV, like went through medical school, became a psychiatrist, was going to become um, Freud's, heir, and he just could not let this like mythopoetic dimension of reality go. And he knew that it was core and super important to understanding the mysteries of the psyche and human consciousness and what we're doing here from a spiritual standpoint. So I completely agree. And you've actually kind of brought us full circle back to Disclosure Day at the end of the podcast. So
Yeah.
so good job. But yeah, he, again, keeping it moderately spoiler free, he uses a few different animals in the film as sort of emissaries of aliens in his film. But I think the truth goes even deeper. To your point, is that I think the alien is another one of these symbols. I think the
Hmm.
alien is
Yeah.
another manifestation of the message, right? And
Yeah. The thing behind it. Yeah.
yeah, and it has something to do. It's like um the cover of the most probably famous cover of Passport to Magonia, where it's the gray alien wearing all the masks.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I think
That's the one I have. It's
but I think
great.
the gray alien is another mask,
For
right?
sure.
And
Yeah.
and whatever it is some kind of probably ineffable, deeper truth than we can understand. And there's this. Have you seen that clip of John Mack talking to Terrence McKenna?
No.
Dude,
That sounds interesting.
I think you would really, really find it interesting, because Mac, it just lays it out there.
I'm beginning to put together a structure of what this is about. And what I'm getting is, if you could think of the divine, or if you can think of the world of both spirit with form and spirit without form, or the anima mundi, whatever your language for it, the great spirit, the Holy Spirit, whatever it is, we have lost contact with it. It signals us we don't listen. For most of us, the only language that we know now is the language of the material world. So it's as if the divinity say, okay, if that's all you understand, I'll give it to you in the material world. I'll give you physical manipulations. I'll give you reproductive connection. I'll give you cuts, scars, scoop marks. I'll give you burned earth where the UFOs land. And I'll give you an experience which is consistent among various people, which empirically everybody agrees. They're photographs of UFOs. It's showing up in the physical world. It may not be of the physical world as we know it, but it communicates in the physical world. And when something shows up in the physical world that belongs in the spirit world, that gets the stiff-necked materialist very excited.
There, and he's saying exactly this, that this is that essentially the alien is the modern sort of technologically coded mask of this phenomenon that we've been interacting with for thousands of years, and that whatever it is it's like a spiritual message. And the
What
spirit
did
and,
McKenna say?
I mean, he was totally in agreement. Like he was like totally, because McKenna's a huge, he's a huge student of
He's fascinating.
the esoteric, the occult, Carl Jung, obviously psychedelic. So he has this understanding that there's deeper layers of truth than physicality for sure. And it's probably, you can't boil it down to just physical beings flying around in ships, because there's so much going on a consciousness level. And when you have things touch you on that level, you realize that that's more real than the physical layer. And the physical layer is just one dimensional layer of what you are. And as soon as you have like that cracks open a little bit, and I know you're afraid of like the second sight and like gaining exposure to these other realms too much, but I think it also just is, for me, it has 100% reinforced the idea that atheism cannot be the answer. This
no
being
chance.
all there is cannot be the answer. And while you and I may not have the exact same, theological outlook or stance on things, I 100% agree on that there's so much more going on than what we see with our physical senses. And if anything, like Plato's cave style, I think physical senses are literally the matrix. Like I think we need to exist in this way to survive in this world, of course. But I think if you want to get to ultimate truth, your senses are like a barrier, or literally a gate. They're gatekeepers to that truth. And all of these ancient traditions are telling you that. Like you've got to remove the outside world and its influences if you really want to get to the deeper spiritual truth, like the deeper truth behind the world. You're not going to find it by like looking through a magnifying glass.
That's a fascinating idea. I'd never considered that. It's like evident, like that's obviously true, but it's like the idea that your senses are like you're like hiding the truth from yourself, which is fascinating. That's very neat.
That's what I think.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really neat idea. I totally agree. Yeah, world's weird, and I think like as far as like experiencing anything, I think what is meant for me will find me. It's like to ask it feels scary, and it feels a little bit presumptuous. So I'm wait and see.
Well, dude, your curiosity though is palpable, because you clearly are on a wisdom finding mission. You go down a lot of these rabbit holes. You're very curious. You seem to want to know what's out there. And I think just if you continue down this train with an open mind, it will. Like I think it will for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, this has been fun.
This has been very fun.
If you're interested in a lot of the stuff, that the Epstein video, I want to give you your flowers too, man. You're kind of a genius on your packaging, because I noticed you only have like 30 videos out, and you've got multiple videos that have hit really, really big for you. So you know how to like touch on stuff. Like you know what's going to get people to click. So that's a skill I'm very envious of, man. That's a hard thing to do.
It took a long time. It started very bad. I am like recently getting the hold of it, but at the beginning I was making 30 thumbnails a video. I mean, I was just trying everything. So, but it took a long time to figure it out, and I'm still figuring it out. Every other video is a miss, but then every blue moon you catch one. But thank you, I appreciate that. That's encouraging to hear.
For sure, man. For sure. Well, thanks for doing this. Anything you want to plug before we wrap?
You can go check out my YouTube channel. You can just look up Taylor McMahon, McMahon, and then I'm the same handle everywhere. It's TayJMCM. So I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. There's not much on TikTok, but I'm about to start posting there. But that's it.
Cool, brother. Thanks for doing it.
No problem. Thank you.
Hang on for me.